Morning. It's good to see you. If you've joined us online, I'm glad that you're with us as well. A guy was dressed all up for a Halloween party that he was walking to way up in the hills of West Virginia. He was dressed as the devil. He had the whole package: red suit, horns, pitchfork, tail. And a huge thunderstorm blows up, and he runs toward the only shelter he can see. And it's a little Pentecostal church. And he didn't know it, but that night they were having a special prayer meeting to pray against the dark forces that might be prowling around on October 31st. He runs up in this torrential downpour and he throws the doors open, and just as he does, a bolt of lightning hits and knocks out the power, and the little church went dark. But the congregation hears the doors open and they turn around and look over their shoulders when that flash of lightning reveals an unmistakable silhouette. The Prince of Darkness himself is attacking their little church. Folks, it was a stampede for the back door. People were diving out of windows. There was praying and cursing. The preacher knocked two old ladies down in his rush to get out. In minutes, the church was empty, except for one old man sitting near the very front who hadn't moved. He had just turned in his seat, and he was looking at the guy in the devil costume. As thunder cracked outside, the partygoer decided he was going to have a little fun. So he marched slowly and methodically up the aisle, stomping as he went, headed for that little old man. And he got right up to him where the little old man was craning his neck to look up at him. And the guy said, "Don't you know who I am?" The old man said, "Yep." He said, "Aren't you afraid of me?" The old man said, "Why should I be afraid of you? I married your sister." For one reason or another, we are living in a time when people are leaving mainstream churches so fast you'd think that was a dangerous place to be. Did you hear the story about the little boy standing in the old Methodist church staring up at the bronze plaque in the foyer? Big old bronze plaque filled with names. You've seen them. Preacher walked up behind him, put his hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "It's a lot of names, isn't it, son?" The little boy asked, "Who are all those people?" Preacher said, "Well, son, that's a list of the names of all the people from this church who died in the service." The little boy's face went pale, and in a trembling voice he asked, "Did they die in the 9 o'clock or the 11 o'clock service?" The George Barna Research Group has reported that changes are taking place rapidly among American churches. 80% of American churches are currently in decline. 80%. Another 4% are growing, but they're growing at less than the birth rate, which means either we're saving our children and letting the rest of the world go to hell, or we're saving some of the rest of the world and letting our children go to hell. In 2004, 4 out of 10 adults in the United States attended church regularly. That was 2004. 20 years later, in 2024, it has dropped to only 3 out of 10. In 2014, 4,000 new churches opened and 3,700 closed, for a gain of 300 churches that year. By 2019, 3,000 churches opened and 4,500 closed, for a net loss of 1,500 churches. And that was in 1 year. We hear of some dynamic mega churches that are drawing multiple thousands in large metropolitan areas, but in reality, we're losing ground. There is a net loss. For every 2 new churches that are established, 3 churches close their doors forever. That's obviously not good. And I've heard that the reason for this church or that church dying is because it has become irrelevant. That the average person can't see anything that says that the church is of any benefit. That most people see the church as just an antiquated institution that exists only to sustain itself. Sadly, the message has changed in far too many churches. No longer calls people to repentance. No longer urges godly living and righteous behavior. Taken the focus off of a loving Savior, paying the price for our sin and pleading for gratitude and faithfulness toward Him. Not many churches are doing that anymore. Well, I shouldn't say not many, but far too many are not doing that anymore. It goes without saying, of course, but the message of the church should never change. We've been preaching the same Jesus, the same plan of salvation for 2,000 years. But while the message never changes, the methods we use have to change. What the disciples did in the first centuries after Jesus hardly resembled the church services of AD 1000. By 1650, things were very, very different again. Same for 1865. Same for the 1950s. Our message doesn't change, but our methods change because our world changes and our culture changes. We say it this way: methods are many, principles are few. Principles never change. Methods always do. Last week, we talked about momentous words from the throne. Behold, I make all things new. I wonder if when God said that, I wonder if He had in mind how His church would constantly be made new. Did He have in mind how His church would be made new over and over again to effectively reach 2,000 plus years of history? Countless and countless cultures, how the church was going to have to change to reach countless cultures around the world? The fact is, God constantly makes His church new. It doesn't take but a brief look at history to see that God makes His church new over and over again. So, 84% of churches stagnant or in decline. Of the 16% that are growing, half are only growing by the birth rate. And though you and I may not appreciate this because I think we've become accustomed to it, we are incredibly blessed. It is rare, statistically, demonstrably, provably, it is rare to have what we have here. We often have first-time guests among us. In fact, it's unusual if we have a Sunday that we don't have first-time guests. I could say if you're a first-time guest, stand up, but if we did, we wouldn't have any first-time guests next week. It's one of the reasons we do. And when you think about having first-time guests among you, consider how intimidating it can be to walk into a strange building. You don't know what the layout is. You don't know where things are. You don't know what door to come into. You don't know what door to go in after that. There are hundreds of people there that you don't know. And most of them seem to know what they're doing and where to go and how to navigate what's happening. It can be intimidating to come into a church for the first time. According to the latest data, God has blessed us to be in about the top 5% of churches as far as simple attendance, but much higher than that in terms of per capita for the area that we're in. And I just want to say to you, I love that God did that where he did it. Let me explain what I mean. If we were in downtown Charlotte or Alexandria or Nashville, then maybe we could look at ourselves and think, look what we've done. But God has such a sense of humor. He put his church in the tiny town of Warsaw, Virginia, and said, watch how I grow it. Some of you are uncomfortable right now with my apparent horn tooting. And I understand that, but I'm calling your attention to these things only to illustrate that something special's going on here. God said, behold, I make all things new. And that includes this little congregation of believers in one little town in the whole country. And our response, because God is constantly making this church new, our response better be, thanks be to God. God is always making his church new. I mean, constantly. And I think it's been obvious for decades now that God is doing a new thing in our community. He's making things new. And he starts with, he's making our church new with people. And he wants every people that he brings here to become his children. Have you ever considered how every new face changes our church? You ever think about that? That every time there's a first-time guest here and that first-time guest comes back and then they come back again and again, every new face changes our church. Every new face makes it new all over again. Since we are, as Rappahannock Church of Christ, since we are, by definition, a collection of people, then every time that collection changes, we're different. Gordon and Carolyn Cole, Chrissy Sharp, Ava Olive, David and Sherry Tribble, and Cameron Rich. These men and women have changed the face of our church. Behold, it's been made new. James Kleinschmidt, Ron and Barbara Supple, Darlene and Dan Ransom, Jessica Robinson, Lily Moss, Linda Ross. They serve in ways that lift God's people, and it makes us new and different. Krista Haven, Tanya Douglas, Jeff Fuller, Babette Petritus, Lisa Wilmore, George and Charlotte Jenkins, Ron Bays. They are doing things in service to the King that were never done here before, or they're doing it in ways that is different than we've done it before. Michael and Cindy Reynolds, Doug and Kimberly Godden, Carolyn Hobbs, Mark Finney, Tina Robinson, Dina Olaf, and Kelly O'Donnell. God makes all things new, but I think he enjoys making people new the best. Now, I don't expect you to recognize all those names. Some of you have heard some of those names before, but you couldn't match a face to a name if your life depended on it. And I'm sure you don't know all the things these people do. They pick up trash, they straighten things up, they help us worship, they build things. They lead small groups, they teach little children, and they lead student groups. They understand and manipulate mixing boards and high-tech camera faders and call shots and greet people with a smile. They are artists and counselors and tear wipers and plant waterers and life-saving coffee brewers. In short, they are servants of the living God. They make us sound and look better. They make us more welcoming, and the bikers make us scarier. They make us smarter, cleaner, friendlier, and tastier. Jesus said to go into all the world and make disciples. They're our marching orders. I mean, literally, it's why we exist. Without that, we'd be much better off to just close our doors if we don't believe in the Great Commission. To go into all the world and make disciples. And we never stop that. As long as there is somebody who doesn't know Christ, we keep searching. And when we're successful in making disciples, I believe God must smile. And I know the angels rejoice because we're fulfilling our mission. And as an added bonus, those new disciples make us smarter, cleaner, friendlier, and tastier. Now, it's true that sometimes I hear someone say something like, I miss the old days. You know, the smaller feel. Now, I understand that nostalgia. I really do. But if I say, I wish we could go back to when we weren't so large, that is so selfish. Somebody ought to smack me. I'm not accepting volunteers at this time. And I always think when somebody says, like I said, I understand that nostalgic feeling. You know, you have good memories of maybe when we were back in Haynesville and we were at some other, level. I understand that. But when somebody says something like that, I want to say, what time would you like to back up to? At what point did we have enough? Do you want to back up a few years when Holly and Dickie Tomlin weren't here, making us too big? When Walt and Tracy Weingar weren't breathing up all our air in here? When Jason Duggan wasn't throwing all that hair in my face, reminding me that I've lost a lot of mine? Or maybe you want to go back even farther than that because you'd like us to be a couple of hundred people fewer so we could go back to just one service. Back before Randy and Heather Packett started taking up space. When Rachel Douglas and Morgan Mullins and David Fine and the Kellum family were still strangers to us. Look, I understand nostalgia. I understand missing the way things used to be. That's okay. But if we say that we wish our church wasn't so big, what are we advocating? I want to tell you a very sad but very true story. Years ago, and this has been many years ago, a couple just stopped attending our church without warning. And I didn't see anything coming. Seemed like they were just fine. They had been very involved. They weren't just coming and sitting at 11 o'clock. They were very involved. They'd been faithful for years. And all of a sudden, they were just gone. And I went and visited them, and I sat in their living room, and I asked them what happened. And they said, nothing happened. We just don't like how big our church has gotten. It's too many people now. And we're just not happy about it. Well, we talked some more. And I tried to kind of steer the conversation, but then the wife said this. She said, Walker, we'd still be going there if it was like it used to be. You know, like it was a few years ago when we had around 100 people. Folks, I did not reply nicely. I simply smiled. And I said, then we can fix this problem. Bring me your church directory and point out the people you want me to tell to go to hell. They did not respond well to my pastoral care. Never seen them again. Now, I don't want to scare you, and I don't want you, especially if you're kind of new here, and say, what kind of church did I come into? So I don't want to scare you. Honestly, I've only heard that sentiment a very few times for nearly 4 decades. I could probably count them on one hand. Definitely count them on 2. And I want you to also know that for some reason, and this is a little odd to me, it's a good odd, but it's odd. Honestly, I haven't heard it said even one time since we moved here. And I don't know whether moving here changed our attitude. But when you hear that even once, that is a terrifying attitude among Christians. Would you agree? God makes all things new. And that includes constantly making our church new. And God does that first by making our church new with people. But also, He's making our church new with attitudes. God's attitude is clarified by his voice from the throne when he says, "Behold, I make all things new." That's God's attitude. Behold, I make all things new. That is not always reflected in our attitudes. Here are some attitudes that might need adjusting. Sunday morning, 8:30 a.m. Come on, kids, I'm scheduled to work coffee corner. Man, this early service is killing me. Why can't we just have one service like we used to? 8:55 a.m. No, the lot is full. I'm going to have to park over by the wood splitters at Tractor Supply. Why don't any of these jokers carpool? 9:01 a.m. Good grief, we're going to have to sit up in the front again. Why does everybody fill in from the back, for crying out loud? I can't text from the front row. Everybody in the band will know what I'm doing. I'm not suggesting that you people in the back are texting. I'm just saying. 10:05 a.m. 10:05 a.m. Well, this is just great. Some clown wants to get baptized. I need coffee, and there probably won't be any hazelnut left. 10:20 a.m. Oh, shoot, Randy Packett's waving at us. Probably wants us to lug extra chairs clear across the parking lot. Oh, he's coming over here. Everybody, pretend you don't see him. But here's an attitude that doesn't need any adjustment. Lord, whatever you want, whatever it takes. Lord, whatever you want, whatever it takes. Maybe I should just be quiet for the next 10 minutes and just let us ruminate on that. That's an attitude that needs no adjustment. It's going to be tough for some of us. But Lord, whatever you want, whatever it takes. And let me be very candid and transparent with you. That very attitude is the attitude I'm seeing more and more without exception. I would seriously say 99% of the time, that's the attitude I'm seeing. I have never personally known a church, and I'm not blowing air up your dress here. I'm telling you what I really think. I have personally never known a church who will put up with more changes, more alterations, more last-minute needs, who will serve more, open their wallet more, and love more. And I thank God for you. And I thank God that I get to be one of your ministers. God is making our church new with people. And he's making us new with the attitude of, Lord, whatever you want, whatever it takes. Finally, he's making our church new with blessings and challenges. Those two things seem to come along together, don't they? Blessings and challenges come at the same time. They come together. Rarely do we see blessing without first being challenged. We like to say it this way. We'll say, with great blessing comes great responsibility. Or, to whom much is given, much shall be required. It is quite rare that great blessings come without first having to overcome significant challenges. My high school diploma was a great blessing to my father more than anybody else, because he thought that boy is never going to make it. My high school diploma was a great blessing, but I will tell you that Algebra 2 and chemistry were a real challenge for a slap-happy guy with poor study habits. And I'm not exaggerating. Chemistry came within a hair's breadth of keeping me from graduating with my class. So I was blessed to have that diploma, but it came after some challenges. My own fault challenges, but challenges nonetheless. Oh, how about this one? Grandchildren. Grandchildren. They are an enormous blessing. I've heard some people say, I wish I could have just skipped the kids and gone straight to the grandkids. I didn't say that. Grandkids, such an enormous blessing. We welcomed number 8 on Monday in the midst of quite a snow. You don't have to clap for that. His name is number 8. No, they named him something. What a blessing. What a blessing. But quite a challenge for the mom and dad with 3 little ones already at home. And a significant challenge for mom, particularly at 9 pounds, 12 ounces. This kid was born with a chicken bone in his hand. I believe my job is a blessing. It has challenges, but it's a privilege and it's a joy to be gainfully employed as I am in this place. So I consider my job to be a great blessing. Despite a few challenges, it's a great blessing. Some ministers, aren't so lucky. I have kept up with a few guys that I went to college with. Just a few. And most of those guys aren't in ministry anymore. Maybe that's because of my choice of friends in college. I don't know. But some ministers aren't so lucky to have the privilege to work in a place like this. Did you hear about the young minister in his first month at his church? On Sunday after the sermon, a guy walked back and shook the preacher's hand. And he said, that sermon was too long. And he walked out the door. The next Sunday, he approached the preacher after the sermon and said, you didn't prepare for that one very well, did you? And he walked away. The third week, the preacher saw him coming, and he thought, oh no, what's he going to say this time? The guy looked at him and said, that was undoubtedly the poorest sermon I've ever heard. And he walked out. The preacher's really upset now, and he grabs a deacon, and he says, hey, you see that guy walking across the parking lot? Who is he? Deacon looks out the door, and he says, oh, don't pay any attention to him. He's about half nuts. He just walks around all the time repeating what he hears other people say. So we all have challenges. God is making our church new when he sends blessings and when he sends challenges. He is making our church new. Rarely are there blessings without challenges. Now, some people might disagree with me. They would say that some people are just blessed and it happens without any challenge, without any hardship. And I thought about that as I was writing this message, and I thought, I have to admit, my wife is a blessing, and even when we butt heads over something, she's never been a challenge to me. I mean, I'm being honest, but I make up for it by being a very challenging man to live with. I provide enough challenge for both of us. Ask her, she'll tell you. See, I just want my wife to be blessed, so I do my part to assure that she will be. Somebody might say, what about winning the lottery? That comes without any challenge. And I'd say that's true, but from what I've read about most lottery winners, I'm not sure that's a blessing. The point is, God is making our church new with blessings and challenges, and they usually come hand in hand. Very little that is worthwhile and valuable, and I know you know this, very little that's worthwhile and valuable, very little that's a blessing, comes without challenge, difficulty, sacrifice, and adversity. We've experienced our share of challenges. We've lost staff members who didn't feel like they fit here? We are constantly having, even with all the space we are constantly having to reassign space that we had planned to use for something else because growth necessitated more room. We've had some challenges. On a few occasions, we've had selfish people abuse our property and even steal from us. Up until recently, we were challenged by a debt bigger than any single debt ever incurred by a church in our area. But with every one of those challenges came blessings in one form or the other. And those blessings came either immediately or after some time went by. So yeah, we've had challenges as God has constantly made our church new. Some of those challenges we handled well. Some we could have done better. But challenge always makes us stronger. And that's true for us personally, individually, and I'm sure that you would agree with me. You can look back on your life at some big challenges you've faced, and you've seen how you were blessed by that, made stronger, smarter, better by those things. But it's also true for us collectively as a church. When we face challenges together, we've been blessed together. Jesus gathered 12 followers around him to lead and train and prepare. And Jesus didn't give them an easy time. People and circumstances were hard on them, seriously. They were scorned, they were ostracized, publicly rejected and rebuked. They were chased out of town and hunted down and whipped and beaten. They were arrested and lied about, and eventually they were killed, all of them but two. All of them but two. And of those two, one was forced to live out his days as a slave in a salt mine deep underground. And the other one was a traitor. If that's how Jesus' closest friends are treated, what's it going to be like for the rest of us? Hebrews chapter 12 says that God chastens or disciplines those that he loves. God chastens, God disciplines those that he loves. You know, seriously, Jesus could have just snapped his omnipotent fingers and instantly eliminated any difficult challenge or opposition for the disciples. But he didn't. He could have stopped all of that, all those challenges, all those hardships. He could have stopped it just like that. But he didn't. He allowed it. I happen to believe that he did that because it's the only way we get stronger, wiser, and gain maturity. So, you got challenges. Well, most of us do. Did you have a rough home life? Comedian Jim Carrey was homeless and had to drop out of school at the age of 15 to support his family. Benjamin Franklin dropped out of school at age 10 because his parents couldn't afford to send him anymore. Charlize Theron watched her mother shoot her father. Are you sick or hurting? In 2003, national surfing champion Bethany Hamilton had her left arm bitten off by a tiger shark. She fought her way back and was the national champion a year later in 2004 and then again in 2005. Richard Branson is one of the richest men in the world with a net worth of just under $3 billion, and he has dyslexia. President Franklin Roosevelt was paralyzed at the age of 39. Albert Einstein didn't utter a word until he was 4 years old. When best-selling author Stephen King was a little boy, his father left their mobile home to buy a pack of cigarettes, but he never came back. King worked as a gas pump attendant, a janitor, and for an industrial laundry. He was so destitute, he had to borrow a typewriter. His novels were rejected by publishing houses an astonishing 30 times. He persevered through his challenges and has written nearly 50 bestsellers. And my personal favorite, have you ever heard of the company? Raise your hand if you've ever heard of it, and I'm going to call on you, see if you really know what you're talking about. Have you ever heard of the company Trafodata, T-R-A-F, Trafodata? Anybody ever heard of that company? Well, I'm not surprised that you haven't. It was a real company that was a miserable failure. After struggling for 6 years, the company went bankrupt. Never earned 1 red cent. In fact, the founder of the company walked away from that company in debt. But he ended up doing all right. His name, Bill Gates. Mr. Gates was quoted, "It's fine to celebrate success, but it's more important to learn from your failures." Challenges come before blessings. And God has graciously supplied us with both, as He has constantly made our church new. The powerful voice from the throne bellowed, "Behold, I make all things new." And I, for one, am just so thankful that God is making our church new. Making it new with people, making it new with attitudes, and making it new with challenges and blessings. May that always be so. May it always be the case. God's ready to make our church new again. God's ready to make you new. Stand up, please.